We are just 1 week out, 1 week later, and there's still a lot of questions about the murder of Atatiana Jefferson, murdered by a police officer in her own home. And we have new information, new and disturbing information about the prosecutor in the case. Let's talk about it right now. We are streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube for this Friday evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Elliot Francis. Boy, it's been quite a day. And you probably wouldn't know that because it's been quite a day from here. We almost didn't do the show tonight for technical reasons. We have a guest we'll meet in just a second. But it was crazy because for a long time we didn't even think he would get on. His Comcast internet was down, and we just didn't think we would have a feed tonight. But we do have the feed, and we are up and rolling. And we thank you for joining us tonight. Our phone lines are open, of course, as they always are. 443-505-7560. 443. There's the number right there, 505-7560. If you choose to join us and talk about what we're going to be talking about tonight, we've got a lot to talk about too. A lot of people upset about this murder that happened not more than about a week ago. But if you want to weigh in, we would love to have you come join us either on chat or on phone right there, 443-505-7560. Come join us, come talk, and come weigh in. Come let your feelings be known about this particular event. Let's talk about it. This has been quite the week for this young lady, Atatiana Jefferson. You can see her right there. She, you know the story. 28 years old, living in Fort Worth, Texas. She was at home with her nephew. From all accounts, as we know, playing video games with her nephew. She was a gamer, so that wasn't unusual for her. Her neighbor across the street had noticed that her door was open. This was not her house, by the way. She was babysitting her neighbor for babysitting her nephew for a family member. And when the neighbor saw that the door was open, he called the police, as most people would do, just to call and check on her. A wellness check, they call it. Please, my neighbor doesn't know what's going on here, and her door's open, and maybe there's something wrong. Police officers showed up. One police officer in particular showed up and made a check on the house, but not the normal check that you would make, given the circumstances. And minutes later, Atatiana was shot, dead, by that police officer. One shot. Shot in her own home. Very reminiscent of a case that we had just thought we settled about a week ago. The case of Amber Geiger, of course, the police officer who shot both of them, John, also in his own house, under different circumstances, as it were. But still questions remain. Why is this happening? Why does this continue to happen? Why would a call from a neighbor, a wellness call, result in the death of a person who was in their home at the time, minding their own business for the most part? We'll talk some more detail in just a second, but before we do, let's see. Where do we want to go with this first? Let's bring in our guest. Let's do that first. Our guest tonight, somebody who you've known, he's been with us before. Jamarhl Crawford joins us tonight from his home in Boston, Massachusetts. Jamarhl, how are you?
Very well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for making yourself available. And I'm glad your internet is working.
Me too.
Yeah, it's a big deal. So listen, let's first of all take a look. Let's kind of go back on this a bit and remind everybody what had happened. At least and if you haven't seen this, it's worth watching. Two things we're going to watch here first before we get into our discussion. This is a combination of the 911 call that was originally made by the neighbor, James Smith, And the body cam, very lucky to have a body cam on this cop, it's very revealing as to what happened and what transpired that night. So let's take a look at that first, and then we'll discuss. Take a look at this. This is the combination 911 tape and the body cam footage from the shooting that night.
Operator, 873, what's the address?
I'm calling about my neighbor.
What's going on there?
Well, the front doors have been open since 10 o'clock, and I haven't seen anybody moving around. It's not normal for them to have both of the doors open this time.
Okay. You know if anyone is inside?
No, I'm not sure. Both of the cars are there.
Okay, bear with me. And they're in the driveway?
Both of the cars are in the driveway.
Are they usually home at this time?
They're usually home, but they never had both of the front doors open with the lights on, like I can see straight through the house. Well, my sister was me up. She stays across the street. I live on the outside of my sister.
We'll have an officer come by. They're already being dispatched now, okay?
Okay, appreciate it. I mean, it's not normal to have both of the doors open this late, that long.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
Jamarhl, your reaction to what you just saw there and heard?
Well, obviously, like happens so many times, an officer, first of all, enters the situation or comes upon the scene already with a preconceived notion and a fear built in, so that I believe their finger is on the trigger and are already so ready to shoot that we see just what we saw there, which is, put your hands up, bang. So there's not even a time to respond to a command. And I don't know, if his vision is obscured or what have you. Can he see that this is a woman? There's a bunch of questions here, obviously, but the officer reacted wrongly and far too quickly and murdered this woman. Now, too, for the neighbor, this is one of those things where you want to be involved, but you don't want to be involved. So you try to do the right thing in his mind, as he said in the interviews. You see something, you say something. And maybe you're concerned if it is a break-in or something, you don't want to get involved yourself. Me, the nosy neighbor, block captain that I am, I probably would have got to a safe distance outside the house and Miss Jones, hey, you all right? It's Jamarhl, you okay?
You're right.
Because I think that what would have happened then is then the woman would have came, oh, okay, we just getting some air or whatever. They just cooked food and was letting some smoke out. Who knows? But those type of things, unfortunately, as black people, it's another thing that we have to think about, where we're not even free to necessarily call the police like everybody else.
Sure. And here's a couple of details too that we'll share with you, the viewer, and kind of remind ourselves. This was meant to be. It was called in, according to what we're hearing from the police, as a wellness check call. That's what came from the neighbor, and we'll hear from the neighbor in just a moment, Mr. Smith. But when the call was relayed to the dispatcher, it was determined to be what they call an open structure call. So in other words, it somehow had changed from the changed from the call that originally came in to the dispatcher to this open structure call. In other words, we've got open doors, we've got open windows. It seems as if somebody may have broken in. An open structure called puts officers typically on a higher alert, from what we're told, because there could be something, could be a burglary, there could be a forced intrusion into the home, there could be a hostage situation. They don't know. However, there's still a lot of questions about how this officer conducted himself, how he approached the building. He had parked his car down the street, walked up to the building alone, saw the open door, and I believe an open window as well, chose not to address those two openings, went in the gate to the back yard, which was dark, and started shining flashlights in the window. What we also know at this point is that Jefferson, Atatiana, inside, heard that noise of the police outside and chose to think that it was a prowler, a burglar outside. She thought the same thing. So you got two people now not knowing what's going on. She pulled a gun out that she was registered to own. She was a registered owner of a gun, pulled it out, and thought she was going to encounter a burglar. He comes up, looks through the window, sees her with a gun, and fires. Now, they originally thought that this would somehow justify the actions of the police officer, but they later scrapped that very early on for good reason. She's a homeowner. She's inside her house. She has a gun that she's registered and legally authorized to carry, and believed she was in fear of her safety. She had every right to put that gun up. Now, I'll say all this to say that officer was only a year on the force. And I've heard tell before, and maybe as a community activist, you can tell me your experience in Boston. These police who are only a year on the force, 6 months on the force, very often we find them up in communities of color and other disinvested communities. Not that all communities of color are disinvested, there are others as well, but they put them in these communities so they can sort of get some training, get their chops, so to speak. But meantime, we've got a lot of officers that they're not ready. Let me put it this way. This officer was not ready. Do you find that to be true in other communities, certainly the one that you live in?
Yes and no. When you say not ready, I believe he was ready. It's what is he ready for? I believe that he was armed with the combative mind state that sees many of the urban communities, urban, of course, being code work for Black and Latino, as an occupied territory. So that, once again, they don't come there to protect and serve. They come there with their guard up, and they come with another mentality. In terms of the age, well, yes, while rookies are often less experienced in terms of what the police do, they learn very quickly. And in my experience, no, police are dangerous to our people from the ages of rookie to retirement. And it's unfortunate, but that's the case. And in that scenario that you gave with, him going around the back and one thing too to note, and another thing that could have stopped it, is he never renounced, hello,
yeah,
this is the police.
Right.
Is
Never
anybody in there?
Never identified himself.
Exactly.
Never identified himself.
So if she heard a noise outside, and there's a flashlight, a person who would, a police officer would say, hey, this is the police. If anybody's in there, you better come out. That type of thing. Once again, it goes to a mindset of being in combat and not really being there on patrol or to serve a neighborhood. It's coming in a sense of combat. And once encountering this woman, I would believe that even if you give an order, even if it was an armed intruder with a ski mask over his head and a rifle, and you have the gun on him, generally the thing is, it's the police, put your hands up, drop the weapon, get on the floor, and you give time to respond to the commands.
Mm-hmm.
A direct command immediately followed a split second. I mean, it would be interesting, the timing on that.
Sure.
Because he did that very quickly.
Absolutely. And here's the other note too, that and we had discussed this offline for a second. It seems to me that we've got two of these shootings now. Everything that happened with this this police officer, not identifying himself, ignoring the two open windows, the open window, the open door, going into the backyard, all of this would have been kind of moot had he not had a certain mentality, a certain mindset that we, certainly as Black men in this country, and I think Black people in general, are very familiar with, and that is this mentality that I see a Black person, I see someone who I'm not familiar with of color, and I immediately come to the conclusion that they are a threat to me. That's a very real mentality, is it not?
Absolutely. And it's a shame too because the fear seems to extend to elderly people, uh, uh, little kids, women. There's no ends to this fear. It goes beyond, able-bodied men or something like that. The fear is really an irrational fear. It's an unjustified fear, and it's a fear that too often we end up paying for with our lives based on this irrational fear. But another point too is that if you're that fearful, then another point would be to wait for backup. I don't know what the protocol is out there, but I would assume that an officer like that would want to maybe call and wait for another officer to come with them. And so the whole thing is suspicious. And it seems like instead of being in fear, he might have, thought he was in an action movie and wanted to, play super cop. That's
Sure.
what it seems more like to me.
Absolutely. 443-505-7560, 443-505-7560 if you want to get in on this conversation. Certainly give us a call or just go and chat. We'll take your questions and certainly read your comments as we're moving along here. Let's talk a little bit about the neighbor. James Smith is his name. He lived right across the street. He's the neighbor who saw the open door, thought he was doing the right thing, and from all intent and purposes is very distraught over this now. Second guessing, or at least having second thoughts about what he had to do that night. He's done a couple of interviews. This one was done by KBSD, I believe in Minnesota. Let's take a look at this right now and get a sense of what James Smith was thinking shortly after this.
And they go open the gate.
James Smith never thought a simple call to police to check on his neighbor would lead to this.
I'm devastated because people say, well, James, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. But I made a call. I made the call because I thought that they were going to do what I called them to do. Check on my neighbor. And they didn't do that.
He says he was sitting on his porch around 2 a.m. Saturday when he saw his neighbor's doors open, which is unusual. Initially, he says he crossed the street and got to the driveway.
And I noticed all the lights were on, it was bright. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything. And because I don't have any weapon, I don't know who's in there, if anybody's in there. And I thought best to go call the police.
So he called and waited for a squad car and planned to talk to officers when they got there. But he says it happened so quickly. And when it was over, his 28-year-old neighbor, Atatiana Jefferson, was dead.
This is the most tragic thing in my life. Most tragic thing in my life. And there's no erasing that. It can't be erased.
He's lived on the street for 50 years and says he's always watched out for his neighbors. He says some people have criticized him for calling police, but he says he thought he was doing the right thing.
I've prayed and I've cried. And I've prayed and I cried, not to quote a song, but I've done that. So now I have to add, I prayed, I cried, and now I'm going to fight. So I'm ready.
He says he now is going to fight for justice and change so this never happens again. In Fort Worth.
Feel bad for him. James Smith thought he was doing the right thing. But as it turns out, it turned badly. The question is this. Going forward, who do you call when something like this happens? He's having second thoughts about it now, about picking up that phone and not doing something else. Maybe calling another neighbor, maybe even calling that house. Again, Atatiana was babysitting. This wasn't necessarily her house. She may or may not have picked up the phone, but, walking over, knocking on the door, just checking on you, seeing how you're going before calling the police. Because at this point, many people believe that calling the police is tantamount to a death sentence. How close am I?
That's absolutely correct. And I know for myself in, communities of color and the hood and, in revolutionary communities, it has long been, we don't call police. That's been the thing for a long time. Even the old song that came out in the 80s, 911 is a joke, that dealt with, 911 is called an ambulance and all that, but it's the same thing. Nobody was dependent on these city services, and oftentimes we felt as that they either neglected us or wouldn't show up at all if you called them in many cases. And then also too, if they did show up, there was a potential for us now to be in jeopardy or danger. I feel incredibly sorry for this brother as well. I hope that his mental health is being taken care of. And now that he talks about joining the fight for justice, I also hope that he's ready to withstand the death threats and everything else that he's going to get from the white supremacist on the other side, particularly living in Texas. One thing that he did say is that the reason that he didn't go over there is I don't have a weapon or nothing. And this is another thing too, where in the absence of calling the police, I believe that every citizen that can arm themselves legally should be armed legally. And my belief is that even if not armed, as I already said, I would have been the neighbor. If you made it to the driveway, I would have at least given a yell out from a safe distance, as safe as you feel. But hey, neighbor, you good? Everything okay? Something. And yeah, if you have a phone number, of course, you can call the phone. If you're close enough to be able to hear the phone ring as you're calling it, what have you. But, this is a horrible thing. Of course, he did not mean that to happen. Anybody who's criticizing him, that's very unfair. And I really pray for his mental health. I hope he doesn't, get so depressed that he would, do anything to his own self or put himself in harm. I hope that no one else harms him. But this is a tragedy all around. There's no winners here. Obviously, I feel the most sorry for this young lady's family, for the poor young nephew who was there and witnessed this thing. For his mental health and that scar that he's gonna carry on for his life. One minute you're playing PlayStation with Auntie, and the next minute something like this happens. The only good thing that I can say here that is actually an anomaly is that at least swift action, or reasonably swift action was taken, that the officer was charged with murder, which very rarely happens, and removed. So I'm happy that it has gone in that direction. I hope that it continues in that direction to a conviction and a long sentence, not a Geiger sentence, which is another case. And also too, this brings into the concept of forgiveness again. Are we in a rush to forgive this officer? I think this shows a time where we need to have a little bit of restraint with our forgiveness, based on the fact that we are under not a one-off. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern.
Sure. And you got me right into my segue, because talking about he is charged with murder at this point. He was he bailed out on $200,000, so he made bail. He's walking the streets, but the grand jury has not come down with their indictment yet. But it's pretty certain that they will. But going forward, the big problem here, and this is one that was we thought very underreported, was the nature of the prosecution's case. This is being prosecuted by a woman by the name of, she's the DA of trying to look for the county here. The county in Fort Worth. Her name is Sharon Wilson. Let's put it that way. She's DA for the county. She is highly suspect. The lawyers for the family is a gentleman by the name of Esley Merritt, who we hope to have on the show in coming weeks. And he is very concerned about Sharon Wilson for this particular reason. Wilson's office, a couple of years back, actually in 2018, prosecuted the case of a woman, 43-year-old Crystal Mason. Crystal Mason had spent a few months in jail for tax evasion. And of course, when you go to jail, when you're convicted, you lose some rights, and one of those rights is your ability to vote. When she was released from prison on this relatively minor charge and conviction, she thought all her rights were restored, including her voting rights. There was an election happening. She participated in the election at the at the encouragement of some of the people in the neighborhood and election officers, not knowing that she was unable to vote because of her recent stay in prison. The DA's office found out about it, and Sharon Wilson prosecuted vigorously. This woman is now back in jail serving a 5-year sentence because of Sharon Wilson. Now yes, that sounds like a harsh sentence, but in contrast to that, that's the same DA, Sharon Wilson, prosecuted a justice of the peace, a guy named Russ Casey, who pleaded guilty to tampering with a government record and resigned after investigation showed he turned in fake signatures to place himself on a primary ballot. The judge was sentenced to 2 years in jail by this DA, Sharon Wilson, and it was probated over 5 years. So he got probation. He got 5 years probation for that, which seemed a lot worse than accidentally voting. Attorney Merritt, fears that this prosecutor is biased, racially biased, and may prove to be a problem during the upcoming trial, which hasn't been scheduled yet. And I think he has right to be concerned. You?
Absolutely. And, white America is going to hate to hear this and disagree vehemently. But all white people are racially biased. And furthermore, DAs are primarily police biased, law enforcement biased. So I don't think that a DA should be presiding over a case at all dealing with a police officer. I hadn't thought of the judge thing before, but I don't think that they should be presiding over anything with a judge too, because the familiarity, the level of relationship there, and I would bet that there are favorites and favoritism doled out. So I'm not fond of a DA prosecuting a police, whether or not that they have shown to be a conservative or lean this way or that way. I think that what eliminates that is the DAs should not prosecute police. Even here in Massachusetts, we have a progressive DA whom I love, DA Rachel Rollins. I don't want DA Rachel Rollins prosecuting police because I believe that police should be prosecuted by an independent entity, independent of law enforcement, just to alleviate conflicts of interest like this. And this DA, of course, should recuse herself, but she's not going to. And the fix may be it. Mm-hmm. And even if there is a sentence given, much like a Amber Geiger, 10-year sentence, but that really only equals out to 5, because then you could be out on parole. These things by law enforcement will say, see, we did the right thing. But no, for communities of color, for black people, we're looking at that as that's a tap on the wrist. That's light justice. So either way, I don't think that we're going to come out with full satisfaction in this. And I believe that what the attorney and the family should push for in Texas and all across the country, people should really move. The DAs should not prosecute police or any law enforcement for that matter. It should be up to an independent body.
Mm-hmm. We now have two incidents like this, very similar. People being shot in their home. That's crazy. That's crazy shit. And obviously, I think most rational thinking people would know that this shouldn't happen to anyone, but it's happening, and it's happening to black folks in particular. What would be your notion of best practice going forward of what we should do to try and get a handle on all this?
It's unfortunate because, as I've said up here with the Boston police, it's not so much the policy, because in many times there are policies against this thing. It's what happens and how do you prevent somebody from deviating from policy, right? So, one, anytime someone should engage a situation like this, I believe that there should be a partner there. Before entry is tried, they should have to announce themselves. But once again, these things are already part of policy. But individual cops may not follow policy. Once an officer violates their own department's policies and protocols, I believe that they should no longer be afforded the protections of that department. because you violated the protocol. So if I work at a restaurant and somebody gets sick after eating the food, but I did everything proper, well then fine. The restaurant can stand by me, and we could try to figure out the thing, but I'm not to blame. But if the restaurant finds out that I spit in the food and put bleach in the steak, then I am to blame because I violated the contract that I had with them, my employer, on how I interact with the public. And so when they deviate from what is their own departmental policy and protocol, I believe that all bets are off. They should no longer be afforded any protections of being a law enforcement officer, because at that point, you are no longer upholding the law or enforcing the law. You are now breaking the law.
Sure.
And now you become like every other lawbreaker. So I don't, yeah.
It seems to me too that there should be some retraining going on here. We've talked about this for past incidences. We've been having this going on now for at least 3 or 4 years. Well, even before that, but it came to a head with the Black Lives Matter movement, and certainly has been front and center in minds of a lot of people. But it just seems that there needs to be more than retraining. There's a psychological reset, I think, that needs to be made in the mind of people who have the authority to use deadly force to protect us, and will sometimes use that force in ways that are harmful and deadly and wrong. And so, if you come from a background where you've heard racial epithets and hate against certain people, not only blacks, Muslim, Asian, you name it, that needs to be addressed, because in the moment, in the fraction of a second that you have to make a decision over whether or not this person is a threat or that this person is not a threat, those inconsistencies are going to rise to the top and cause a very bad situation. And we can't ignore that. We just can't ignore that anymore. Would you agree?
Absolutely. But I mean, almost more than retraining, I think police departments have to be kind of reframed. The entire structure needs to be done, really just a complete overhaul. The Justice Department needs to step up and take really every local police department is a microcosm of the federal government, and they have to adhere to certain federal guidelines in order to receive federal funding. I believe that the Department of Justice needs to, with an iron hand, really enforce for police departments across the country so that we have some sort of cohesion. Too many departments conduct themselves too differently from each other. We need some sort of uniformity of rules, and I think that should come from the federal government. Not to say, of course, that the federal government is perfect, but I think we just need some sort of standardization in policing and kind of reshaping and reframing, rebranding of police in this country from top to bottom. Let's leave the military stuff for the military and the National Guard and all that, and let's let our police force reflect a little bit more of the old thing, the old protect and to serve thing. That's really gone. Our police departments have gotten more militarized. And could you imagine here if we were like a European country? Could you imagine if most of the police, the regular police, didn't even have guns? Mm-hmm. Only police that had guns were like the SWAT team or the ones that respond to hostage situations or bank robberies. But if regular police in a cruiser or a beat didn't have a gun, or maybe if they had a gun but it's locked in the trunk or something, can you imagine that? Do you know how bad the police unions would fight against that? And they would scream bloody murder, and they would tell you how many police put their lives on the line and are getting killed every day. But that's not the case.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we can only hope that some good comes of this. As you said, James Smith, we hope and pray for his ongoing health, and certainly the health of her nephew, young 8-year-old nephew who was there when she was shot. And we certainly hope that this doesn't happen again. We're gonna have these incidents, unfortunately, but something as cruel and as hard to understand as somebody being shot in their home by a police officer who was sworn to protect and serve is just beyond comprehension. And we hope we don't have to have this conversation again going forward. Jamarhl Crawford, coming out of Boston, Massachusetts, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure as always.
All right, we'll do this again very soon. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on Now. All right. And thank you for being with us tonight. We had good attendance here tonight. Nobody called, but that's okay. We'll get you to call soon. We will. Before we go, let me just bring one thing up here. I would be horribly remiss. Let me just bring this in. Bear with me for a second here. If we did not mention, or at least had a one mention of this gentleman that you see on the screen here, as you probably heard this week, we were saddened to hear the death of Elijah Cummings, Congressman Elijah Cummings from Massachusetts. He was the chairman of the House.
Maryland.
What did I say?
You said Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. Oh gosh, thank you. Thanks, Jamal. The congressman from Maryland, which we are. We're down here in the Maryland, D.C. area. Congressman from Maryland, House Oversight Reform Committee chairman, Democrat, 23-year veteran of the House. He's a key figure, of course, in the impeachment inquiry into President Trump, and, of course, a recent target of criticism by the president. He had been suffering from undisclosed ailments, heart and vascular trouble for some time now, but was strong enough to fight it back. He was doing his job as always. I had the pleasure of knowing him for the past I'd say 17 years off and on in my capacity as a reporter here in the Washington D.C. area, and I can tell you that he was a man of not only great strength, but great passion. I don't think I've ever run into somebody with as much passion as Elijah Cummings. He fought for the people like hell up in Baltimore and for disinvested communities. He himself was the son of a sharecropper who his father had moved from South Carolina to Baltimore, as many people do, moving north to find a better way. He did. His son eventually became a Howard University graduate, and again joined the Maryland State Legislature, and then went on to become a United States Congressman 23 years ago. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced that his body will lie in state in Statuary Hall in the U.S. Capitol, beginning October 24th. And again, we our sympathies and our heartfelt condolences go out tonight to the family of Elijah Cummings. And what we say here from now, sir, well done. Job well done. And as you said, you're going to be dancing with the angels. And give them our best regards. We know you'll be fighting from afar. We'll keep you in our mind, in our hearts, and we'll always remember. Well, that's it for tonight. That's our show for tonight. We're going to be off for a week, beginning next week. So no show next week. 2 weeks we return with a brand new show and some brand new improvements, hopefully, and things that you will enjoy. So keep an eye out. Certainly like us, subscribe to us on YouTube, if you will. Tell your friends, and certainly you can find our information if you have any suggested guests or topics. We'll take that as well. But in the meantime, have a great week. Have a great weekend. We'll see you soon. Take care.